Good morning. We are in week 8 of the introduction to culture studies, and today we'll start the first of topics that move away from the private side of culture to more social types of culture, and the first of these topics is religion. And of course, we are here in the culture studies section, so what we are going to discuss is not really religion in terms of theology or the teachings of any specific type of religion or kind of religion, but rather religion as a social phenomenon. And I will try to make it more or less general, so applicable to all religions that you can think of, either the ones that exist still in the world or historical religions like ancient religions of Greece and Egypt, and perhaps some distant religions from, I don't know, from America, so pre-Columbian religions, for example. And before we start the discussion, I would like to make a personal request, okay? If you consider yourself to be a religious believer, try to think of any other religion but your own, okay? So supposing you are Christian or Muslim or whatever other religion you follow personally, try to think of some other religion, perhaps an ancient religion, perhaps a religion distant in space, so something that will not be clouded by your emotional response. You're absolutely allowed, so to speak, to have your personal beliefs and your emotional response to any religion or none at all. But for the sake of this discussion, I would like you to try to distance yourself from your emotional output rather than try to learn more about your own religion if you have one, okay? So that's one thing, and let's look at the first slide. It is a very complex evolutionary tree of myth and religion made by Simon Davis, and it would be a good idea to stop here, perhaps to Google it or to look at it up close. It shows you the evolution and the interdependence of some religions, many religions, let's say, not most, because as you can see, apparently there has been around 10,000 different religions worldwide. So this table, although it's quite complex, does not cater for them all. And around 84% of human population nowadays consider themselves to be religious. Of course, they do not follow the same religion. They follow all kinds of religions, sometimes big ones with millions or even billions of followers, sometimes very small. And of course, the majority of these 10,000 religions would probably fall into the small category, but it's interesting to see how they are interconnected, how they are influenced among themselves. So according to this table, the oldest ones fall into the category of animism. That is the belief that everything, animals, objects, things, not only people of course as well, but anything existent has a spiritual part, has a soul in a way. So this sort of belief started to appear around 100,000 years before the Common Era, or before Christ, as sometimes it's also said. Later we have the development of the early religions. They are divided geographically, so European, African, Semitic, Iranian, Indian, East Asian, Arctic, all the way to Oceanic. So they develop in different places around the world. They also develop through time, and some of them, like the European fertility worship, which you may remember from those so-called Venus figurines. We are going to look at some examples in a little moment. They were quite important historically as one of the early forms of religion in our own part of the world, but they eventually died out or were reabsorbed into other forms of religion. So as you can see, there are all kinds of interdependencies, and for example, if we find Christianity on this map or family tree, you can see it has been influenced by Judaism and earlier Mesopotamian religions, polytheistic Mesopotamian religions, and earlier Proto-Indo-European polytheistic religions. So it kind of grows one from the other. It would be interesting to look in close-up at these interdependencies and family trees of different religions, especially those that still have active followers. I think there are two things, two little images on this family tree I don't really agree with, and they are on top of it. So the scientific method and quantum mechanics. I don't think these are religions. Quantum mechanics is a sub-field of the study of physics. The scientific method is basically the basic of science, of the development of modern science. You might say it starts to develop in the Renaissance, perhaps, or it's kind of develops from there. It is influenced by Christianity, it is influenced by Islam, but it's not a religion. So perhaps this might be seen as a mistake. It's debatable. Some thinkers, some intellectuals think that scientific method or atheism, which is sometimes connected with scientific method, is a kind of religion. I don't believe in that. The same way that abstinence is not an addiction, or not collecting stamps is not a hobby. It's an absence of religion rather than another religion. But this is one of those intellectual debates that you can sometimes encounter. So that's the first slide. You can spend some time looking at it and seeing those connections up close, but let's move from there and let's move to the definition of religion by one of the anthropologists we have already encountered, Clifford Geertz. He wrote in 1993 that religion is a system of symbols which acts to establish powerful, pervasive and long-lasting moods and motivations in men by formulating conceptions of a general order of existence and clothing these conceptions with such an aura of factuality that the moods and motivations seem uniquely realistic. It is quite complex. Again, a little clarification. Men here means humans, people, persons. I guess he's following the old linguistic traditions of writing men when somebody means humanity. But what is important is religion is a system of symbols, and that this system establishes powerful, pervasive, and long-lasting moods and motivations. So it's a way to motivate people. It's a way to influence the emotions of people. It is powerful, one of the most powerful symbolic systems in culture. It is pervasive, so it seems very true to the people who believe in it, and it's definitely long-lasting, although, as you could see in the previous slide, it sometimes evolves as well. It formulates conceptions of a general order of existence. So religions aim to explain the world, explain culture, explain being human, the reality and aims of humanity. And these are the conceptions of a general order. So generally speaking, it's the way to understand the world, and especially if we look at it from a historical perspective, this was invented or initiated by people at a very early state of development as a species. We might say whether or not it's evolutionary thing, whether or not it responds to something natural in the human brain, but generally, even if we take it as a completely social construction, they clothe these conceptions, those conceptions of general order of existence, with such an aura of factuality that the moods and motivations seem uniquely realistic. It means people believe in it. They believe in it with their entire mental faculty. They are prepared to defend these beliefs to the utmost, even to the point of dying or killing in their defense. This is what makes religion especially powerful as the system of symbols, and as we will see later on, potentially dangerous as a social phenomenon. There are some elements which actually allow to identify some system of symbols as religion, and these elements are mythology, ritual, and ethics. And if you look back to this evolutionary tree again, you will see that all religions, you probably know something about some historical religions or some distant religions. If you are religious, you probably know a lot about your own religion, and you will notice that each religion has these elements: mythology, ritual, and ethics. Here we have the slides, the images referring to the Christian religion, but of course it could be done for any other religion. That could be quite an interesting little exercise to do. And that's really why I think the scientific method is not a religion, because it doesn't have the mythology, it doesn't have the ritual, and well, ethics, perhaps some vestige of ethics, but if the pursuit of truth is an ethical point, then okay, but not all these elements are present. And for a religion, they should be. There is also a connection, especially in this historical perspective, between magic and religion, because both magic and religion imply a belief in supernatural beings and forces. However, there is a very marked difference between these two ways of belief in the supernatural. In case of magic, and we can talk about, let's say, magic in early tribal societies, so from the historical perspective, or some distant places where perhaps some elements of shamanic religion still function. We can talk about magic as part of literature, especially fantasy literature and the modern pop culture. We can talk about modern belief systems such as Wicca or neo-paganism, which have elements of magic understood in a traditional way. So in magic, the participants think they can control the governing forces of the universe by performing certain rituals. So it's a belief that if you do the ritual correctly, you can influence the supernatural beings and forces. In religion, the participants think they can influence the conscious beings who control the universe by performing certain rituals. It could be some sort of bribing behavior, like giving presents to the deities or spirits. It could be prayer, so some sort of ritualistic behavior, but not in order to influence, to control the supernatural forces of the universe, but to influence, for example, plead with the conscious beings who control the universe. Okay, that's the difference. In magic, universe is more or less mechanistic, and you can influence it if you know the codes. In religion, the supernatural beings are intelligent and conscious, and they can be bargained with. So that's the idea. There are different ways of magical thinking, or sometimes also superstition in modern societies. And this is part of the anthropological perspective on religion. So, for example, we can have the practices of divination, that is, predicting the future through rituals. Witchcraft, for example, explaining events, like why something happened, through rituals. Sorcery, which means black or white magic, influencing reality for good or evil purpose. So white magic for good purposes, black magic for evil purposes. Healing practices, so all kinds of rituals that are meant to bring health and well-being to the participants. So all forms of alternative medicine, things like homeopathy, for example. So the medical healing practices that are not scientifically proven, some of them gave rise to medical science. For example, herbal medicine. Many of the herbal remedies have been proven to be effective by science. But many magical or religious systems have those healing practices. Not all of them. All of them have mythology, ritual, and ethics. Everything else is optional. Priests or other intermediaries between the world of people and the supernatural are optional. Healing practices are optional. Predicting the future, divination, whatever else, optional. What you really need for some system of symbols to be counted among religions is mythology, ritual, and ethics. So the earliest religions, you may remember when we talked about the earliest forms of human society, the development of human settlements, and the earliest constructions left by people. For example, the place now in Turkey called Göbekli Tepe, which according to the archaeologist who discovered it was the world's first temple, which was built even before the invention of pottery, before the invention of permanent settlements, so the first villages and cities, before the invention of agriculture. So this points to a possible existence of a very deeply seated need in human mind, in human brain, for the belief in the supernatural, either to understand the world around them or to understand what it means to be human, or to perform certain ritual practices which, for example, mark important moments of passage in human life, like birth, death, burial, sex, so sexual initiation, for example. These are the rites of passage that help through ceremonies and rituals to pass from one state of being to another. So we have the earliest forms of burial. This is one of the evidence that religion is a very old phenomenon, because animals do not really bury their dead. Well, some perhaps do, but human forms of burial are much more ritualized, and definitely they point to some sort of belief in the afterlife, in either the return of the spirit, so there is some sort of belief in the spirit, the return of the spirit to the world of the spirits, or reincarnation, or some other forms of change in existence in the humans. We have those early so-called Venus figurines, like a very famous artifact called Willendorf Venus, which you can see in Vienna. Very often they show female forms, so with large breasts, with usually rather large bodies, which at that time could probably mean fertility or prosperity or abundance. So according to the historians of religion, they might represent deities, some sort of an early goddess. That's why she's called Venus very often. Goddess of fertility, the goddess of procreation, or the divine element in the feminine. For early humans, it must have been almost magical, the fact that women give birth to children and that they feed them with the milk produced by their own bodies. So this also points to the very early existence of religion. Also, another form of early human activity, cave art. So early paintings in caves in Europe and outside of Europe, practically around the world, which include symbols, which include people involved in what looks to be some sort of ritual activities, which involves possibly rituals connected with hunting, so animals, perhaps animal spirits. So this all points to the fact that religion as a social phenomenon is one of the earliest human social phenomena in existence, and it's very deeply rooted in the biology of human life, in the important thresholds of human life, and very possibly it answers some sort of biological need present in the human brain. There are all kinds of scientific attempts to explain religion, especially the evolutionary psychology of religion is important here. So looking for reasons why religion developed and why it developed when it did. The changes in human biology, such as the increased brain size, the beginning of the use of tools, so the early tools used by those early forms of humans, the beginning of the use of language, so the communication, verbal communication, and also the beginning of storytelling, if you think about that. group living, development of social roles. All these things start to develop around, for the first time, well, early forms of such behaviors around 100,000 years ago. So this is more or less when we start having earliest burials and earliest evidence of some sort of symbolic thinking. How these evolutionary changes would influence the development of religion? There are different theories. One is the theory of agent detection, so the propensity of people to anthropomorphize nature. So animism, if you remember the bottom line of this evolutionary tree of religions, looking for causality, looking for some sort of evidence or even imagined evidence of consciousness in nature, some sort of order in a rather random character of nature. So anthropomorphizing, it means making it similar to humans. So animals can think like humans according to this sort of thinking. Even trees or rivers or rocks or anything, it's like anything is imbued with some sort of spiritual capacity. This is animism. Then etiology, meaning explaining natural phenomena. Natural phenomena such as the seasons. Why do we have winter? Why do we have spring? Early religions give stories about these changes. Disasters. Why do we have volcanoes? Why do we have storms? Is it the gods who make these things? Is it because they are angry? What happens? And of course the idea of the memes, which we have already discussed, that is the so-called mind viruses, as Richard Dawkins would call it. So somebody came up with the idea, it seemed plausible to other people, so they started to recreate this idea, and so it spread like a virus. There are some names of those evolutionary psychologists, like Stephen Jay Gould, who came up with the idea of non-overlapping magisteria. It means more or less that religion and science deal with completely different things. So they can coexist because they basically deal with different questions. Their magisteria, their area of expertise, do not overlap. Then we have Pascal Boyer and his very interesting book, Religion Explained, in which he argues that religion is a social construct, so it's a kind of natural development of the human society and human brain. And the last name here on the list, Daniel Dennett, a very influential contemporary intellectual, a philosopher and evolutionary psychologist. He believes religion is a result of evolution. He compares it to language. So it developed in a similar way that language did. And let's now look at those three elements. So let's look at these three fundamental elements of religion: mythology, ritual, and ethics. So what do I mean by mythology? It could be holy places, could be sacred stories and texts, so all kinds of holy books. It could be the cosmogony, which means the myth of the origin of the world, the origin of a nation perhaps, or a group of people, a tribe or something. Here we have some images of deities like the Hindu god Shiva, or the Olympian gods of ancient Greece. We also have the image of one of the holy texts of world religions, the Holy Quran, the foundational text of Islam. Myths can be a basis of a worldview. They can be metaphors of human psychology, and at least for me, they form the most important part of religion in general as a social phenomenon, and each of the religions individually, really. So even ancient religions like ancient Greek religion, which do not survive as, let's say, active religions, whereas the other elements are still practiced, they still are relevant because of their mythology. And much of the 20th century study of culture, study of psychology, study of the human mind have been run by the intellectuals who are interested in mythology. And this is what we are going to do next week, because I think mythology is such an important aspect of human culture, and especially in the study of what we do here at the English Institute, philology, the stories that people tell, literature and other forms of storytelling. It is all based in some sort of mythological thinking, the mythological propensity to construct models of human behavior, to construct metaphors for human psychology, for example, embodied by those classical gods. There are some names that we are definitely going to meet again, names like Carl Jung or Joseph Campbell or Mircea Eliade. The studies of comparative religion, the studies of religion from a psychological and psychoanalytical perspective, and also the importance of mythology in studying storytelling and narration in literature, film, and other types of storytelling. So this is something that we are definitely going to return to. So just this one slide now, and we'll return to this next week. The other part, which is very important for any religion, especially the active religions, is ritual. It could be in the form of prayer, sacrifice, contemplation, incantation, so holy singing, sacred dance. It could be led by specialists, so shaman, priests, charismatic leaders. It is the concept of sacred or profane objects. It is the concept of food taboos and symbolic foods. This is all the rituals connected with the rites of passage. This is the religious festivals and holidays. So here we have some images from different religions, like a shamanic dance of some, I think, American, Native American tribe. We have meditation led by a leader in a Buddhist temple, and we have probably a mother and a child praying together in a modern setting, so probably in a Christian religion. All these elements can happen. Of course, not all religions have all of them at the same time. Some religions have different forms of prayer, like, I don't know, rosary or other beads that make prayer more structured. There are all kinds of symbolic foods or food taboos. So on one hand, we have holy foodstuffs like the Eucharist, of course, in Christianity, but also food taboos like the taboo against eating pork in Jewish and Muslim religions. We have rites of passage, so something I already mentioned, usually connected with important moments in human life, such as birth, marriage, passing from childhood into adulthood, and of course death and burial. All kinds of holidays, festivals, processions, dances, ritual behavior, the Holy Mass, and all other forms of rituals. All religions have them. If you are familiar with some from your personal experience, try to think of other religions. What kind of rituals do they have? What is different? What is similar to the religion you are more familiar with? And the last part, which is common for all religions, is some form of ethics. So here we have some photographs, again coming from different religions. So here we have a group of Christian nuns leading some sort of mission, maybe hospital, maybe some sort of charity mission, helping the poor, probably in Africa, judging from the people in this picture. We have Hindu worshippers giving away food for the needy. We have a group of Muslims actually having a demonstration against terrorism. We'll talk about the problematic aspects of religion in a little moment. So what we have is some sort of ethics grounded in religion, probably, usually based on mythology and strengthened through ritual. But what do I mean by ethics? It could be morality. So morality sanctified by the gods. What is good behavior? What is moral? What is immoral? What is a virtue? What is a vice? It could be more or less obvious things, so common for very many world ethical systems. So something like do not hurt other people or do not kill other people. But some religions treat it differently. For example, is it moral to eat meat, to kill animals for meat? Some religions say it's immoral, it's a very bad thing, it's a very immoral behavior. Some say it's kind of neutral. Some possibly would even say it's very moral to do because it's sanctified by gods in holy texts and sacred stories. What is moral very strongly depends on the culture. Next thing, group formation and group solidarity. This is probably the most important evolutionary aspect of religious ethics. The way that it helps to strengthen societal bonds through the identification of the group and the promotion of group solidarity. In some religions, the moral behavior tries to go beyond the group solidarity, but in all religions, part of the ethics is to be charitable, to be helpful, first of all, towards the members of your own group. So those moral and immoral behaviors, this is something that's perhaps most visible in daily life, and it could be derived from other social influences than religions. But religions, especially in the historical perspective, have been very instrumental in the development of ethical thinking. I told you I will address the problematic aspects of religion, and many religions, either historical or existent nowadays, have a lot of problematic things, like human and animal sacrifice, genital mutilation of children, wars and terrorism endorsed by religion, slavery endorsed or at least tolerated by religion, prostitution endorsed by religion, discrimination against women and other groups, for example the LGBT plus people, killing heretics and blasphemers. So all these aspects have happened in historical religions. That's why you have the pre-Columbian image of an Aztec priest killing a human sacrifice, which was part of the Aztec religion, and from what we know about this religion, it was not considered immoral. So you can see the differences really in religious ethics. Genital mutilation of children, boys and girls, the circumcision of boys, the genital mutilation of little girls, in many religions. So Judaism has it, Islam has it, some tribal religions have it in different forms, but it is unfortunately quite common even in the modern world. Wars and terrorism, this is part of this group formation and group solidarity. If we have strong group identity, anyone outside the group could be seen as an enemy. So there have been probably the worst wars in human history have been fought over religion. And when the religious groups were not strong enough to wage kind of all-out war, they resorted to terrorism. You can probably give examples from recent history. Slavery, endorsed in the Bible. So the Judeo-Christian religion has been in favor of slavery for a very long time. Not recently, but historically speaking, unfortunately that's the case. Many other religions as well. Prostitution. There have been ritual sexual behaviors, sometimes voluntary. This wouldn't be much of a problem, but sometimes the sex workers were actually forced into prostitution by religious authorities. Of course, you can have some problematic social behaviors like slavery or wars or prostitution even without religion, but I'm talking about the cases in which religion has been instrumental in the proliferation of such behaviors. Discrimination against women and other vulnerable groups. Everywhere, most religions, perhaps not all, luckily, have it, but very many religions, even the big religions with billions of followers, still have it. Killing the dissenters, killing the heretics and blasphemers, so people who are considered to be offensive against the mythology or ritual of the religion. They have been persecuted in worst cases. They have been killed. There you go. Lots of potential problems. So there are some positive sides, especially from the historical perspective, when the group formation was essential for human survival, but in the modern society, not so much. And if you think that Judeo-Christian religion has been free of these problems, think again. Here we have another slide. This shows some of these problems from our own culture, meaning the Western culture, the culture influenced by the Bible, by Christianity. So here we have terrorists from IRA, the Irish Republican Army, during the Troubles in Ireland, which was a kind of civil war fought between the different groups of Christians, resorting to terrorism and horrible atrocities. We have the burning of heretics in Western Europe, in England as well, during the prosecution of Protestants and Catholics and the religious wars in Europe. We have a slave here, an African slave brought from Africa. This is actually an image from the early 19th century, published by one of the groups, Christian groups, who tried to abolish slavery in the Western world. The caption reads, "Am I not a man and a brother?" So emphasizing the humanity of enslaved people. But if you think of the history of the Western world, like the United States, slavery in America was abolished only in the middle of the 19th century. And one of the reasons why it existed for so long was religion. Because in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, but not only, slavery is tolerated and seen as something maybe not moral, but morally neutral. And the last one is actually from a film showing the sacrifice of Abraham. So the founder of Judaism, Christianity and Islam, as you will see, the Abrahamic religions, they all claim to be descendants of Abraham. And he heard a voice in his head of God who told him to kill his son. And of course, if you know this story, it didn't happen because an angel intervened in the last moment. But the very idea that religious people, even such great heroes of religion as Abraham, would even consider killing a child as a sacrifice for God, and they would think that the God would like it, it's not really a positive thought. So that's the definition, the kind of broad definition of religion, and some more elements of vocabulary and perhaps a bit of statistical data. So we have the types of religious worship. Depending on the relationship between people and the deities. So you can have individualistic religions with no intermediaries between human and deity. You can have shamanistic religions with part-time religious specialists, so kind of magicians or shamans. So people who are part of the local community, and sometimes, especially during special festivals and holidays, they perform religious functions, but they are not fully professional, let's put it this way. We can have communal religious worship, in which a group, could be a special clan, could be an age group, perform rituals, for example seasonal rituals or rituals of passage. For example, the elders who introduce younger members of the group into adulthood through rituals. And most of the modern religions have the ecclesiastical form of worship, in which they have a hierarchy of full-time religious specialists, so the clergy. If you're interested, the largest religious groups are here. So by a broad margin, the largest religious group nowadays is Christianity, catering for almost 1/3 of world population. Altogether 2.2 billion of worshippers, with the largest groups being Catholics, 1.1 billion, and Protestants, all denominations of Protestants taken together, 0.8 billion people who follow Christianity. Again, there have been wars within this religion, so Protestants against Catholics, or different forms of Protestant denominations against each other. We'll talk about the history of Christianity, especially in Britain, in a little moment, but this is just to give you the general idea. The second largest religious groups is Islam, with 1.6 billion worshippers, around 23% of the people in the world. Then Hinduism, 1 billion worshippers, 15% of the people. Then Buddhism with 0.5, so half billion worshippers, that is around 7% of the people. Another 23% are people who identify as non-religious. So again, a rather broad group, combining people of different beliefs. Some are atheists, some are agnostics. Atheists basically claim that there is no God, that there is no supernatural reality. Agnostics, this is a 19th century English invention, if you think about that, claim that it's beyond the scope of human knowledge. So basically, humans are not equipped to know for sure whether or not some sort of supernatural existence even is. So I used the word the Abrahamic religions already. So these are the religions that together form the largest group of religions. They comprise Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So Christianity is the largest of them in terms of the population of worshippers. Then Islam, then Judaism. They developed in this order. So first Judaism, which gave rise to Christianity, which kind of gave rise to Islam, if you think about that. So if you look at it from the Christian perspective, Judaism is something like a prequel, and Islam is something like a sequel / spin-off, if you think about that. What these religions have in common: they are all monotheistic, which means they worship one God. It could be more complex than that, like the belief in the Holy Trinity in Christianity, but generally the central concept is that there is one God, monotheistic, one God, as opposed to polytheistic, which means many gods. They all believe, these three religions, that God revealed himself to Abraham. So that's why they are called Abrahamic. Abraham is the founder of these three world religions. They see God as the creator of the universe and the source of moral law. More or less self-explanatory. This is a central topic in the religious texts these are all book religions. They have a central religious text. The Old Testament for Judaism, the Old and New Testament for Christianity, especially the New Testament, written by the apostles of Jesus, and the Quran for Islam. They include, of course, the moral teachings of these religions, but they also present many stories and figures which are the same. Like Jesus is an important prophet for Islam, and some of the Old Testament prophets are respected in all three religions. Jerusalem is seen as a holy city for all of these religions, and they have what is called the eschatological worldview. It means the idea that in general the world moves towards something, that the world, the human world, has its ultimate goal. The goal, sometimes called the end times, which will be like the destruction or perhaps the reconstruction of the human world, the earth, the universe, depending how you look at it. But the idea that the world moves, the world history and the history of humanity moves in a specified direction towards the end, or the end of a cycle, let's say, perhaps, maybe. This is a very important aspect of the Abrahamic religions. So the eschatological worldview. And now let's look at the history of Christianity especially from the British perspective. So the last part of today's lecture will be about the history of Christianity, and especially since we are in the English Institute, the way that Christianity influenced Great Britain and the English-speaking countries. So there will be some slides quite packed with information, with dates and events. You do not have to memorize it. It's just to give you some sort of roadmap for the history of religion in the English-speaking countries. So, of course, Christianity does not start in Britain. It develops as a sect of Judaism, which started to develop in the 1st century of the Common Era on the outskirts of the Roman Empire. The word sect I use does not have the same meaning as sekta in Polish. A sect is a perfectly legitimate word. It's not an offensive word or a pejorative word, which means a kind of dangerous religious subgroup. A sect is a smaller group within a larger religion. The dangerous subgroup, usually with a charismatic leader and some problematic behaviors, is called a cult in English, not a sect. So Christianity, which started its existence as a sect of Judaism, so of course Jesus and the apostles were born into Jewish families. They were raised in the Jewish religion. The new religion was persecuted by the Romans. Later it started to be tolerated, and by the year 380 it was made a state religion in Rome. What follows later is the Christianization of Europe, also Britain. There are some names that you may remember from history. Saint Augustine in the 6th century, the bishop from Rome who came to Britain to Christianize the Anglo-Saxons. Saint Patrick in the 5th century who came to Christianize Ireland. So these were basically the Christian missionaries from Rome, and they spread the teachings of Christianity within the British Isles. What developed were two types of Christianity. One was preached by St. Augustine, like quite similar to modern Christianity, with a very strict hierarchical structure of priests and bishops and cathedrals. So there was this whole social structure connected with Christianity, spreading in Great Britain. In Ireland, however, or some places in northern Britain, there was another type of Christianity following St. Patrick's ideas, which was centered around the monasteries. It's sometimes called monasticism. So the centers of religious life were not local cathedrals with bishops and priests actually preaching to the faithful, but monasteries that were sites of religion, also sites of learning, sites where beautiful books were made. So if you remember when we talked about the history of arts in Britain, it's very closely connected with Christianity ever since the Christianization of Britain. This was resolved in the year 664 at the Synod of Whitby. Whitby is a town in England with a huge, now ruined abbey, which housed this synod, which is the meeting of bishops and other religious leaders who decided to accept the Roman Creed, so to follow the hierarchical structure proposed by Rome and St. Augustine. So the monastery survived, but they were less important afterwards. What happens later in 1054 is the Great East-West Schism. So there are some internal divisions within the Christian Church which affect Christianity in general, and some of them will be quite important for Britain as well. Not the Great East-West Schism, which created the Western Christianity and Eastern Orthodox Church, or in fact a few Eastern churches, so the Russian Orthodox, the Greek Orthodox Church, and some other followers of the Eastern tradition. So this was the first great division. What happened in the Middle Ages in Britain was the unending disputes between the civil and ecclesiastical powers, so between the state and the church. Perhaps the most dramatic episode in these disputes happened in 1170, when the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Becket, was murdered by the Knights of King Henry II. This is why Canterbury became such an important site of pilgrimage. This is why Geoffrey Chaucer wrote his Canterbury Tales. So we have a dramatic event connected with the internal problems of the Christian Church, influencing the politics, influencing the culture, and having the implications reaching far beyond religion. Then what happens in the 15th and 16th century is the Great Reformation. So another great schism, this time in the West. So what we have is a massive movement within the Western Church to reform religion, and especially to reform the institutions of the Church, which are increasingly seen as corrupt and having negative effect on religious life and spiritual salvation of the people. There are some names that you may remember. The first one here is John Wycliffe, and his group called Lollards. This was an English group. They supported the translation of the Bible into English. So they believed that religion should be closer to the people. So first of all, that people, ordinary people, not members of the clergy, should have access to the main religious text, that is the Bible. They were against the greed of the church, like the generally immoral, mostly sexually immoral life of the clergy, selling offices, so the kind of greed and depravity of the church, which they perceived as something very detrimental to religion. Other names: Jan Hus, reformer in the now Czech Republic, then in the lands of German-speaking countries, mostly kind of crossroads between German and Slavic lands. He proposed the reform of the church and the abolition of church hierarchy. His ideas sparked a huge wave of persecution. Jan Hus was burned at the stake, like many of those so-called heretics. What followed was a period of bloody wars, including civil wars in Western Europe, Western and Central Europe. What also happens in the West around that time is the beginning of the Inquisition. So a special church institution, like the church police, established to persecute the heretics, so the people who spread unorthodox beliefs. What follows is witch hunt. So the belief in witchcraft and the belief in some sort of supernatural fight between the Christians and the people who are considered to be followers of magic. According to different sources, between 60,000 up to 9 million victims in Europe of witch hunting, most of them women, not all, but most of them women. Britain, England, Scotland were horrible places during that time. Lots of people lost their lives in very painful ways, and many of them were burnt at the stake. There were mass persecutions. The term witch hunting is still used sometimes for mass persecution of roughly innocent people, so quite horrible. Then what we have here on this image is Martin Luther, who publishes his 95 Theses in Wittenberg. In 1517, he nailed his ideas of church reform to the door of the church, and this is what really started another wave of Reformation in Europe. Some names that you may remember from this period are the reformers who were most active in the German-speaking countries, mostly in Switzerland, Ulrich Zwingli or John Calvin. Especially John Calvin was a very important religious authority for the Protestants in Britain, together with Martin Luther. Martin Luther was officially condemned by the Catholic Church, and here is something that you will never forget, really. 1521, a special meeting, like a synod, but it has a special name in history. It has the name of the diet of worms. I kid you not. So here you have Martin Luther having a very strange meal, and the title, The Diet of Worms. So this was a meeting of church officials presided over by the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, and the Diet issued the edict condemning Luther. So he was officially condemned by the Catholic Church. This is when he uttered the very famous words that are repeated in history many times over. Here I stand, I can do no other. This is like his last words when he was faced with persecution and condemnation. He said, I will not recant. This is where I stand, and of course he suffered the consequences. This religious turmoil was very important for Britain, and especially for England, because of the establishment of the Church of England. If you remember anything from history of England, this is not really based on any spiritual ideas, and as one of the very intelligent and eloquent critics of religion, Christopher Hitchens, once said, "This is what you get when you found a political system on the family values of Henry VIII. Yes, Henry VIII wanted to divorce his wife and marry his lover, and that is why he broke with the Catholic Church in Rome, even though earlier he was granted the very honorary title of the Defender of the Faith, of the Catholic faith, against Martin Luther by the Pope. By 1534, he decided he had enough of that, and the Act of Supremacy was passed, which made Henry VIII the supreme head of the Church of England, just to divorce his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, and marry his second wife, Anne Boleyn. What followed was the dissolution of monasteries, which was, of course, the money grab. He wanted to get the money of especially the rich monasteries. Many historical places, abbeys and convents were destroyed. That's why you have so many ruined abbeys in England, and they were so inspirational for later generations of Gothic novelists and romantics. After the death of Henry VIII, the church did not die with him, so his only son, Edward VI, followed in his father's footsteps. He even took it one step further. He was more Protestant in terms of his religious worship than Henry VIII was. So the new Book of Common Prayer was introduced, and basically the forms of worship, the forms of ritual, started following more the Protestant ways rather than the Catholic ways. Then in the middle of the 17th century, the civil war between King Charles I and the Parliament was very strongly based on the religious differences between King Charles I, who was more relaxed as a Protestant, and stricter Puritan members of Parliament. The king lost, and he also lost his head. Later, after the death of Oliver Cromwell, who ruled as Lord Protector, the dynasty of the Stuarts were brought back from exile in France. But then, in the next generation, towards the end of the 17th century, there was another important moment in the religious history and religious and political history of Britain, the so-called Glorious Revolution, when James II was deposed by his daughter Mary II and her husband William III of Orange. So what follows, Britain was becoming more and more Protestant, and James II was deposed because he converted to Catholicism, or he kind of never converted back to Protestantism. What followed after the Reformation was a period of quite strong anti-Catholicism in Britain. There were some martyrs of the Catholic cause, especially Henry VIII's Lord Chancellor Thomas More, who was beheaded in 1535 and in the interwar period, so in the 20th century, he was eventually canonized as a Catholic saint. There was a Catholic plot, the so-called gunpowder plot in 1605, to kill the king, Charles I. So before he had the problem with the parliament, which started the Civil War, he narrowly escaped the terrorist attacks by a Catholic group. So that's why we have the Guy Fawkes Day, the 5th of November. So to commemorate the gunpowder plot, and actually the way that they did not succeed. Then we have in the 18th century the Jacobite rebellion in Scotland in favor of the Catholic line of the Stuarts. So James II was deposed. His daughter Mary, the Protestant, died without leaving an heir. The Stuarts, being the Scottish royal family for generations, had quite a strong following in Scotland, and another civil war broke out, the Jacobite rebellion, because people in Scotland wanted to have a Stuart king even if he was Catholic. Of course, the English would not have it, and the new dynasty, the Hanoverians, were invited by the parliament to take the throne. The Catholics were finally emancipated, so they were given the equal rights in 1829, and during the 19th century their political situation gradually improved. However, the social situation and especially the economic situation was sometimes very bad, especially in the 1840s, during the so-called Great Famine, or the potato famine in Ireland, when a failure of potato crops caused the massive famine and massive migration of mostly Catholic Irish people, mostly to America. That's why there is so many Irish Catholics in the United States. And come here. Finally, in 1850, the Catholic hierarchy in England was re-established, so the followers of the Catholic Church were allowed to worship as they pleased. Two more things about Anglican religion and Anglican Church. It was not so much of a monolith as many people might think. In the 19th century, the Church of England was quite deeply divided among themselves, mostly between the High Church and the Low Church. The High Church was sometimes called the Anglo-Catholic, traditional, more devoted to elaborate ritual and beautiful churches. That's why you have so many neo-Gothic churches built in the Victorian period. While the Low Church was more evangelical, more concerned with personal piety, charity, simplicity. What they what they propagated, for example, was Sunday schools and teaching usually poor rural communities, teaching children to read so they could read the Bible. So we have different aims, different motivations within the Church of England. This was present throughout the 19th century. Later they came to some sort of reconciliation, coming up with an idea in between called the Broad Church, which would combine elements of both high and low churches. The state of the Anglican religion nowadays is quite stable. Here I have the photograph of the late Queen. Yeah, we could put the new king, King Charles III, but I think I'll just let the Queen stay for a while for this semester. So the Queen, or the monarch, the king now, is the head of the church. This is a hereditary title. Also another hereditary title, the defender of the faith. That's the title that Henry VIII received, still as a prince, as the author of an essay against Martin Luther from the Pope. I think the popes have never stopped regretting that. So the monarch appoints archbishops, bishops, deans of cathedrals. It's not done on the whim of the monarch. She or he now is advised by the Prime Minister, who is advised by church leaders. So it's basically the list of the nominations submitted by the church authorities, handed to the Prime Minister's office, who in turn hands it to the monarch. Since the 1980s, women can become priests and bishops in the Church of England. There are quite a few female bishops right now. Anglican priests, as most Protestant priests, can marry, and in case of local parish priests, parish vicars, this is even something they are expected to do, because there are some local community functions for the priest's wife. There is some controversy over same-sex marriages. Clergy are not allowed, but they can perform civil partnerships. Co ty robisz, Watson? But the mood is generally tolerant towards same-sex unions. An interesting thing is that religious education is compulsory at state schools, but they study different religions. Christianity is given some precedence, but children study different religions at school. There are also religious schools, so parents can choose a religious school for their child. Co ty robisz? Co ty robisz, Watson? O co tobie chodzi? Co jest, kotek? Maybe the last slide for today is again about the statistics, religion in the modern United Kingdom. As you can see, almost half of the population, and this was made a few years ago, so probably it's increasing, say they do not follow any religion at all. So no religion. More than 48% of the people. Among those who follow religions, almost 20% say they are Anglican. Other Christians or other Protestant denominations, more than 15%, and Catholic around 8.3%. The rest are non-Christian religions taken together, so Muslims and Buddhists and Jews and all other non-Christian religions. So as you can see, religion is definitely losing its grip on the British society, especially as a formalized hierarchical institution. There are some modern ideas like, let's see the last slide, neo-paganism. So some religious or spiritual groups following what is generally called New Age spirituality, a late 20th century phenomenon, which combines romantic reconstructionist groups since the 18th century. So let's try to go back to the Druid times to reconstruct the Celtic religions or the other polytheistic groups, very often duotheistic. So there are two gods, male and female, the moon goddess and the horned god, very common way of looking at the central pair of deities. These groups, sometimes called Wicca or Neo-Druidism or Heathenism, mostly those who follow Germanic folk religions, are quite eclectic in their belief systems. Very often they have elements of nature cults, so the seasons and rituals connected with the seasons, and they have very loose organization with no priests and no formal hierarchy. So that's it, and next week we'll go back to the study of mythology and we'll look at it from a cultural perspective.